on behalf of IGNCA and CATS, I welcome all the speakers and each one of you to the Play Story session of Festival of Places 2020-21, jointly hosted by Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, IGNCA, New Delhi, and CATS. The Festival of Places is an initiative of CATS, a not-for-profit organization working in the area of heritage conservation, management, and advocacy since 2001. We at CATS feel very strongly about the dismal state of public spaces in our cities and firmly believe change in the way we think, talk, and use public spaces can only begin at the grassroots by creatively engaging people with places and empowering them to make a difference to the places and spaces around. The Festival of Places is an idea born out of the spirit of volunteerism to come together, collaborate, co-create, and celebrate places that nurture health, happiness, and foster community living. Moreover, the festival aims to help discover the much overlooked human dimension of places. The main highlight of the festival this year is Play Stories, a series of online storytelling sessions that help understand the hidden dimensions, multiple interpretations, and varied memories associated with places, highlighting their distinct characteristics as well as unraveling the bond that people have with them, a connection that lives through their experiences. The storytelling sessions by professionals, scholars, students from diverse fields focused on public spaces have been planned around the idea of exploring memory in places. So join Rohan Rishikumar, Aryan Mehta, and myself for an evening at Leaping Windows Café, Versova. But wait, weren't we supposed to meet in a public space? Yes, we are. Come with us, we'll take you to an interesting and intimate social space this time, where you can meet up, read, write, eat, and chat all in one place. With its stunning comic book collection, Leaping Windows Cafe in Versova brings together people with a love for both comic books and food. Today, we will find out more about such thematic crossover spaces of social encounter, creatively positioned between private and public spaces, and how they help in building the public realm and fostering a vibrant community. The title of today's play story is Love, Watermelon Juice and Comic Books, Leaping Windows Cafe and Comic Library, Versova. And the theme for the session is Intimate Social Spaces of Interaction. Our play storyteller for this session, Mr. Aryan Mehta, will be taking us around the place and share his memories with us. The play's expert for the session, Mr. Rohan Rishikumar, will unravel the charm and subtle workings of such intimate social spaces of interaction. Our play storyteller Aryan Mehta is a budding filmmaker and is a second-year student in the film production program of the School of Entertainment Arts, Mumbai. He enjoys reading up on various subjects and topics in line with philosophical concepts, general psychology, architecture, music, and all fields in the creative realm. Also a trained and well-seasoned photographer, Aryan has an eye for the unconventional and enjoys the art of storytelling through the visual medium. Our place expert Rohan Rishikumar is an architect, urban designer, and filmmaker practicing in Mumbai. He is a dean of the architecture course at the Kamla Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute for Architecture and Environmental Studies. His work ranges from architecture, urban research, and consultancy projects to works in film and visual art. He is interested in issues concerning housing, public space, and in exploring the many ways of reading and representing the city. Rohan is the co-editor of the publication on an interdisciplinary research and art collaboration, Project Cinema City. He also curates film programs and writes on cinema, architecture, and urban issues. He has also made films on art, architecture, and urbanism, including Nostalgia for the Future, Lovely Villa, and Squeeze Lime in Your Eye. We now begin our conversation around Leaping Windows Cafe Versova, and I will invite Aryan to present his play story. Aryan, over to you.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So today's session is going to be about this little quaint cafe that I came across, that I was introduced to. The reason I sort of looked at this place and chose to make my film around it is the fact that I've had some very deeply personal experiences here, but also because I enjoy the space so much. It's a very unique proposition in the heart of Mumbai, and it's something that you don't see every single day. It's this quaint little cafe with a little bookstore, sorry, a little library attached to it, where I mean you can eat and drink, but also get to know books. And that's something that I feel like is slowly becoming a niche now. And that's something I'm not too happy about. I love books, and I feel like I want to talk about them. I want everyone to read them, just so we can have a greater conversation around them. And so this is a place that's deeply personal to me. It's a place that's helped me grow, and it's a place that I want to share with everyone and just enjoy. Yeah.
Karin, we'll now play your video.
Yep.
If you asked me what kind of reading material I was interested in when I was 14, I'd respond by saying comic books. As an impressionable young teenager, my mind would often wander. I'd require some sort of book to keep me in place. The only problem was, I could never bring myself to read non graphic or non fiction books. My imaginative brain would always require fictional visual stimulation. It stemmed either from watching films or the broadly celebrated category of physical books known as comic books. These weren't easy to come by, and certainly not the fancy superhero ones that you'd find abroad. So every time I did come across one, I'd hold on to it for dear life and read it over and over. This problem of mine is one for which a solution I could not find. Unless I procured one from overseas, but that wasn't a feasible option. While I was bothered by this issue in the back of my mind, a storm was brewing in a neighborhood nearby, something I would learn of much later in the future. It started life as an amateur online book lending service. Leaping Windows was birthed into existence out of a couple's rebellious nature to go against systemic, boring jobs and do something out of their passion for the art of reading. The cafe's co-owner used to be an English teacher in Japan. She happened to encounter comic books during her time there and she was smitten. Upon her return to Mumbai, she decided to open up a library, one that catered exclusively to the needs of comic book enthusiasts. After minor success, the library started serving food. Starting with sandwiches and the evergreen Maggi noodles through a tiny pilot kitchen. The place sort of became this if you know spot for comic book lovers around the city. And word traveled fast. As the months went by, more and more people learned of this reader's paradise, either through word of mouth or as passers-by that were out for an evening walk. Some even through the online publication articles, ones that would feature glamorous reviews about this quaint cafe in the Versova area. As the number of patrons expanded, so did the menu and the selection of books. It grew from Maggie and sandwiches to a full-blown continental menu, with dishes to cater to the needs of every kind of foodie. The staff also went from just the owner couple and a few people, from manning the pilot kitchen to a full-blown staff of 25, including a manager, cooks, waiters, and even their own in-house delivery people. The growth would not come as a surprise to the general public. However, one would be hard-pressed not to wonder just how many people love comic books, especially to accelerate the scale of a small library created out of passion into a mecca for all readers, both serious and casual. Over the course of just a few years, it became this unspoken land of dreams built atop comic books, strung together by Maggie and cemented using good old ingenuity. So a couple of years later, I heard about this hip new place nearby through a friend, and the inner child in me yearned to go and have a look. As I walked in its direction, the establishment did not scream cafe. Hell, it barely said anything. No branding, no major marketing, nobody walking in or out. What had I got myself into? The only identifiable element I could see was brightly colored posters that adorned the outer boundary of the location. I was hesitant, but made the leap and walked inside. As I looked around, there were tables with rustic looking metal legs, with aged wooden tops decorated with ashtrays, containing remnants of smoked cigarettes in them. Upon further inspection, there was a board with branding on it. So out of sight, one would surely miss it. Terribly made too, with old 2000s graphics that looked dated, on a white stained sheet with blue lettering on it. Leaping windows, it read. An odd brand name, I thought to myself. It rolled off the tongue fairly easily, so I didn't make much of it. I was greeted at the entrance to the inner seating area by a very sweet employee. He gave me a warm smile as he opened the door for my friend and I. Upon making my way inside, the first thing that caught my eye was a massive window. It overlooked the drab street outside, also flooding in a healthy amount of natural light onto the dark colored interiors. The space was cramped but not uncomfortable. Tables were placed closely together, about enough room for four at one. The exception being the immediate table on the left side, which was sufficient for just two. The place was packed inside, to my surprise, with at least two people at each table, chattering away about their lives. Some even asking the waiters for recommendations on what they should order. On my right, there was an unassuming looking door that led to a compact bathroom. Another one to its right, from where the staff was bringing out food and beverages. A small staircase led up to another floor, a much smaller space of bare minimum height. One would have to crouch and crawl their way through just to get to their table. A person of my height at a towering 6'1" would have the worst of times fitting, especially if you were sitting at the last table in the far left corner, as I was, courtesy of my companion's whim. There was a charm about the seating area though. For all its shortcomings, quite literally, it was made up for by the privacy offered through the small breaks in the walls between each table. It was the one place in the entire establishment where you could actually have a conversation. The walls were also adorned with art created by community artists. Colorful, varied, and impactful. You would have a hard time not being completely mesmerized by each of these pieces. However, the crown jewel of this home away from home laid in its basement. A warm, inviting yellow light shone from an opening underneath the staircase that led upstairs, as if there were a room filled with gold and riches awaiting my arrival. I precariously made my way down. My eyes slowly adjusted to the dim and moody lighting of the space. A room stacked to its absolute brim with shelves revealed itself, filled with books of all kinds. Everything from short and sweet, fun comics to daunting ones with moving stories and impactful characters. Two lights hung from the ceiling, bathing the room in a deep, saturated orangish yellow hue. Shelves cast a dark shadow in the corners. Two joined, low coffee tables sat proudly in the center, surrounded by cushions, beanbags, and what closely resembled Japanese tatami mats. The smell of musty, old yellowed pages hung in the room. I was reminded of my childhood, when I would go to the library and read to my heart's content. This place was starting to hit close to home. Nostalgia has always been a funny concept to me. I'm someone who has a progressive mindset, always refusing to dwell on the past and continuing to push forward. I've always been around books, music, and art. I often reminisce about the various creative forms I grew up on. Some of it was lost while I was phasing through different years of my teenage life. Interest diversified, and my focus shifted towards materialistic and insignificant things. I was intrigued by leaping windows because of a voice within me. That voice wanted this space to be a physical embodiment of my memories. I was hesitant to face the past by my nature. However, I was prepared by my curiosity to go and explore the suggestion, made by someone very close and important to me. A figure who was a catalyst in my personal growth, who taught me the importance of solidified beliefs. In a way, I was contradicting myself, the same way leaping windows contradicts its metropolitan surroundings. It serves as an analog device in modern times, where the digital medium has surrounded us, a sanctuary for people like me, who need the safety and simplicity of the analog items to remind us of our roots. The place also served as a catalyst. It made me want to go out of my comfort zone and try new things. I learned how to be open minded partially through it. My companion asked me to try her watermelon cooler. As its name suggests, it was composed primarily of the one fruit I refused to consume. Soon, it became part of my regular order there. I question if it was due to the relationship that I had with this entity that made me enjoy it, or if it was the sweltering heat that this drink cooled off. Or maybe because deep down, I truly did enjoy watermelon. But because of lack of will to go back to my past, I developed a misjudged hate for the fruit. Regardless, I have this space to thank for it. Something about it, from the understated nature of its appearance, its quaint furniture, that stunning library, in combination with those warm lights, just something seems to strike a personal chord with me, instilling a familiar feeling of comfort within. Leaping Windows has, is, and always will be one of my favorite places in the wonderful city of Mumbai, primarily because of how many memories I have attached with it. Also, how it had a small but significant impact on my personal growth during my teenage years, and how unapologetically different it is from every other cafe in the city.
You, Aryan, for this wonderfully made video on Leaping Windows Cafe. And actually, your memories become part of our memories now, the way you took us through the different spaces and your likes and dislikes. I would now like to invite Rohan Rishikumar to please present his view on such intimate spaces of social interaction. Rohan, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
And thank you, Rishi. Thank you, Aryan, for this invitation. It's a pleasure to talk about small public space in Bombay, and it's always a pleasure to talk about anything that has to do with storytelling. But I'm going to make a presentation too because I feel like after that film by Aryan, I felt it would be nice to kind of really think through some of the ideas that went through my head as I was watching it, and I'm just going to kind of share my screen if that's okay. Yeah. Just let me know if you can see what's on screen.
Yeah, sure.
Can you?
Yeah, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Great, right? So, I am right now, in the city of Vrindavan, um, the town on the banks of the Yamuna, which is said to have, grown on the forest where Krishna made love to the gopis and especially to Radha. This was the place that they met, and every corner in this city has stories of the love between them. Nowadays, very little of that old forest can be seen really, except in sort of these enclosed gardens. But each of these gardens have stories about them. You know. This is the ghats of Vrindavan, right, as we see them right now, where the water used to come right up to here. Okay. And this is Seva Kunj. This is supposed to be the place where Krishna massaged Radha's tired feet. This is where they, I guess, it's a kund in Nidhivan. And this is Nidhivan, where these trees that you're seeing turn into gopis at night. And Krishna makes love to all of them simultaneously by multiplying himself into many versions of himself. The myth around this particular garden is that no one is allowed to see what happens in this garden. Hmm? If, one second, there's something wrong with my, sorry, something wrong with my, yeah, nahi ja raha hai. That, sorry, you guys can see it, right?
We can see you. Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
something going on. My internet's really bad because I'm in Vrindavan right now. It's very shaky. The myth is that if this no one is allowed to see all this love making that happens at night, because if you do, you won't be ever able to tell anyone what is it that you've actually seen, right? And these are some of the graves that you'll see on the side of people who dared to kind of take a look at it. Another place that is there, around the Braj area is this one. This is called Raman Reti. And Raman Reti is supposed to be the place where Balram and Krishna frolicked as young boys. And so what people do is that they go to Raman Reti, which the sand is really beautiful and soft. And they also go about frolicking in the sand as if they are Krishna and Balram. And I find this kind of amazing, like a city which can allow for people to kind of perform publicly things that they would never do sometimes even in their private realm, like just kind of play and have fun and kind of enjoy themselves. What is interesting about all of these is that none of these public spaces was really ever designed. It was made by people. People kind of came and told stories about these spaces. They then performed with their bodies in these spaces, and rituals then emerged out of these itself. So these are public spaces that kind of emerged out of time. But of course, there is a caveat here. And rituals themselves are rooted so much within religion and so much within religious structures itself. Many of these spaces cannot necessarily be called completely public in the way that we imagine what public is, because there's always a sort of access in terms of who's allowed and who's not allowed. There's always about what is allowed and what is not allowed. There are lists of do's and don'ts that are constantly there to regulate what the body can do and can't do. But I decided to kind of compare that with the kind of what can be called the kind of planned city, the planned kind of public spaces of the city. And looking like this, which is of course this is New Bombay, one of the few places in Bombay where there is a planned public space, right? An aerial view done by Rajesh Vora. So this is the kind of this kind of space is like a utopian space, the planned city space of the public space, where we make these gardens and we make these plazas where we think that everyone will be able to come and access. The public for us, modern individuals, is imagined as a space where free individuals can meet on an equal basis. It is also the space where we can meet people who are not like us on an equal footing. This is our democratic ideal of what a public space is meant to be. And as societies, we have created spaces where we, modern citizens, can perform this role. Plazas, waterfronts, gardens are all spaces where we kind of where we actually recreate the rituals of the modern living. We play cricket and we do things that are supposed to be secular in nature. This is imagined as the public of the modern city. However, if you look at any of our Indian cities, you'll realize that this imagination of the public, these kinds of spaces, okay, this incredible kind of public space with all of these guys hanging around and playing, is something that is really, really difficult to achieve. What you have actually in our cities is the public that is constantly being gated off, that is always being protected, that is always being quarantined from other people, whoever these other people are. You have high walls that are put around what are called public spaces, extraordinarily surveillanced sort of spaces where which are closed off in the middle of the afternoon because you don't want the unsavory element in there. or you have street furniture that is quite difficult to spend an hour sitting on. This is in Kala Ghoda in Bombay. So what you have is actually an increasing privatization of the public realm, where the public, where everyone is supposed to come and kind of meet each other, seems to be slowly and steadily becoming less and less accessible to many of us. So what we are left with is actually the ways in which we then start making the public. We start inhabiting the public realm. We start telling stories of the public realm by our bodies. Pretty much similar to what happens sometimes in Vrindavan, where rather than us occupying spaces that are designed, we through storytelling in some ways begin to construct a public realm that we then begin to inhabit. And it reminded me of these addas that are there in Calcutta. And the adda, I don't know whether you guys know, I mean, I'm not Bengali either, but I have a lot of Bengali friends. And what they love to do is they love to kind of hang around in an adda and, shoot the breezes. Sit and talk and chat about politics and football, I guess, and of course, Satyajit Ray, right? And this is really the kind of space. So it's a sort of space for conversations. It's a space where language becomes the medium through which people begin to form bonds with one another. Where storytelling, stories about things become the places where people begin to construct identities, construct friendships and intimacies. I felt like that was such an important thing in the way that one imagines the public realm today. That the public realm is a realm which enables someone to kind of tell stories to each other. And stories of gentleness and warmth and camaraderie that can create bonds between people, can create intimacies, can even create romances. Too often, sometimes we have a very moralistic imagination of what the public is meant to be. But if we start imagining the public as a lived public, where people come and kind of really celebrate their own identities, fulfill their own destinies, then we have another imagination of the public that emerges as well. Away from the highly ritualistic and perhaps gated imaginations that can exist in extraordinarily religious circumstances, or for that matter, in these sort of contemporary so-called modern cities that tend to treat people as outsiders, tend to treat people as people who are not wanted within the community. And it's not surprising that for me to be somebody who kind of loves the idea of storytelling as a space where encounters can be made between people, because my parents also met over actually books. They were both working at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, and there's this incredible stilt area that's there below. And my mother and my father were both carrying P.G. Wodehouse novels and said to each other, "Oh, you like P.G. Wodehouse too?" So, I am a product of an encounter that happens through books. I think it's really, really important for us to kind of think about this when we think about the kind of public kinds of spaces that we are making in these stories. It's after all, with shared stories that we make sense of the world. Communities are built on these shared stories. Narratives or stories bind us to each other, to nature. They help us make sense of our place in the world, in the universe. It is through language that we make sense of all of these things, through art, through culture. We enter characters vicariously and live other lives, perform possibilities of becoming maybe other identities. Through stories, we make our own publics, whether those are these extraordinary fantasies of places elsewhere, and I'm using comic book images, or learn about people who are living in oppressive circumstances on the other side of the world, or learn of the lives of lonely young men or lonely older men in a small home in Chicago, or look at that, or discover young youth during the apocalypse in Tokyo of 2022. I think is the date that Akira has written it. I think it's only through these kinds of storytelling and narratives that we begin to kind of begin to speak to each other. That's why I love the fact that when we were talking about leaping windows, we were really talking about stories. And I think the great city, I think any great city, would be a city that allows us to enter stories, enter other people's stories, learn through empathy what other people are thinking. And books can enable those empathies, not only with the characters within books, or to the authors who have written those books, but also to the people whom we sit about and discuss those books with, like in an adda. leaping windows in some sense, because it offers both food for the brain and food for the body and food for the soul, can become, that sort of space. And for me, a great city cannot be defined by really how should I put it, how beautiful and pretty it is conventionally. For me, a great city is one that offers the best stories that really talk about the fulfillment of people's lives and their destinies, through which they can kind of begin to love each other, know each other a little better. So for me, I think what was really important about what Aryan showed us was that he really was making a claim to talk about places where we can tell each other stories and where we can listen to other people's stories. And I think that that kind of space in the physical realm is gradually more and more missing from our cities. And I think it's important for us to reclaim them as people who are interested in cities and their development. That's it. That's my spiel. Thank you so much. Stopping sharing.
Thank you so much, Rohan. I really enjoyed both the presentations. In fact, before I go to the people who are tuning in to us for questions, I would actually personally like to ask you a couple of questions. And I see that these two stories are so contrasting. Aryan picked up the Leaping Windows Cafe, and you starting with the Vrindavan. But I also see a very common strand within the two spaces. One is where the comic books become the center of attraction, and Vrindavan and its public spaces where I feel the stories are written in stones, in trees, in the sands, and both are very evocative, communicative. In today's digital world, we are unknowingly moving our lives from the physical world to a world of virtual relationships, and are increasingly consuming digital content. In this scenario, how relevant are these physical spaces of interaction and also the real world of physical books and the art of storytelling and communicating and interacting through stories? I would like you, Rohan, to kind of respond to this.
I thought you'll ask Aryan because he's the younger guy living in the digital realm, so he'll
We
be
will
more
come to
suited for
Aryan
this
as well.
answer.
I
You
have
know,
some very interesting questions for Aryan.
yeah. I think one of the things that we always do is that we tend to kind of, especially in the world that we are living in right now, we tend to always imagine the physical and the digital as two separate realms entirely. And that I think is self-defeating in some sense. Huh? I think it's always nice to see the digital as something that is embedded in my in physicality as well. Even change, because I can't separate my, like right now I'm here, but I'm also there. It's difficult to know where I am. So I think it's self-defeating to kind of make that separation. Why I'm saying self-defeating, because then we lose out on the opportunity of using this new mediated reality as a place where we can make friendships or where we can make kind of relationships with one another. If, and I'm saying that, so let us not it's lovely to meet people, it's lovely to touch people, it's lovely to share a cup of coffee with somebody. All of these are extraordinary moments of intimacy that can really foster lovely bonds between people. But I think with this medium, we need not let go of that. This creates new modes through which intimacies can be possible. I can speak with my mother, right now when I want to. Right? I can make a group call to 6 of my friends who are scattered around the world, and I can chat with them all day. I can do all of these things because of this new medium as well. I can also meet people that I'm not familiar with who have shared interests. My interest in Japanese manga, for example, I can find people across the world maybe who have interests like mine and make connections with them. So I think uh, rather than rue the day that is never going to happen where the digital can be discarded, I think it would rather be make it just makes more sense for us to just embrace it and say, this is a new mediated reality that we are living in, and try and look at ways in which we can speak to each other. Like right now, I'm able to speak to you from Vrindavan, Urvashi, or in Delhi, and Aryan is in Bombay, and I assume a lot of the audience is also from around the world, and it's nice that we are able to have this conversation. So I think it's nicer to kind of imagine this as a new possibility for interaction.
Yeah. True. I think each of these, spaces, as we call the third spaces, and maybe the virtual third spaces, both have their own relevance, and I think, and their qualities are, also, depending on these extraordinary times of pandemics, I think these virtual spaces have been really bringing much more people together than actually the physical, public spaces. Over to you, Aryan. We would like to, talk to you more about your experience of Leaping Windows Cafe. Could you also share some of the, stories about how the cafe came up, and also how do you see the cafe sitting in the neighborhood? Is there some kind of connection with the surroundings? How does the local residents, kind of see this kind of public, semi-public space in their context? Aryan, are you there?
Very
Yeah.
much.
Urvashi, we lost you, but I think you're back now.
There was some, some network problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ma'am,
You
could
didn't
just
complete your question because you got
Yeah.
cut before the question got finished.
Okay. I was asking you, Aryan, how do you see this Sleeping Windows Cafe sitting in its context? How do people, the local residents around, what is the character of other spaces around it, and the people who live there, and how do they see this, semi-public space as part of their lives, or it is just, they are not connected to it, or it is only the comic lovers who throng this public space, semi-public space?
So I think if I had to begin sort of my explanation about how this place is an almost mecca, right, for comic book readers, is because number one, accessibility towards comic books right now is a bit scarce in the grand scheme of things, because books are far more easily accessible. And comic books is something either they're too expensive or they're not available, and there's just multiple barriers to entry with comic books, right? You can always find them online, but I'd say that's only part of the fun. When you get to hold the book in your hand, it's a completely different feeling, right? So I think in that regard, Leaping Windows automatically becomes an established place, and it becomes a special moment in time for people to come and sort of withdraw from everything else, come and sit in one place, and then have a discussion, or even just read by themselves. So I'd say that's one of the biggest uplifting factors about the location in general. Plus the neighborhood in itself, and this is not something that maybe I've elaborated on in my film, but the neighborhood itself is very, very small. It's a very cornerstone type place in the heart of Versova, which again is a small place, and it's very suburban. It's very quiet. And even the road that leads up to it, it's very narrow. There's not a lot of space for cars to come in. There's not a lot of parking, and it's more of like a pass-through place, so that you can get to maybe the back road, or you could get to Juhu. So that in itself, when you have such a quaint sort of area, and you have this very bustling food joint, but also a hidden secret where you've got a library, you've got a place to sit and read. I think it tries to cater to a larger audience, but in doing that, it brings the larger audience into that niche itself, which I think is a beautiful thing. I mean, that doesn't really happen quite often. You could say you can go to an art gallery, but again, the regular person would say, "Oh, why do I want to look at art in person? I can just look at it online." Right? If you were to say, "Hey, I'll take you to this amazing food place. Come with me." Everyone's interested. And then if you've got that art factor in there, automatically over waiting for your food to come in, you've got that conversation going about, "Oh, wow, this is an amazing painting. Or maybe this is an amazing artwork that I've never seen before." So you bring in someone that's from a mass audience that necessarily isn't into this niche, and you bring them in and you introduce them to a whole different world. And that allows you to connect or tap into a part of them that maybe they didn't realize they had. So I would say that's one of the bigger factors of Leaping Windows being at least for me, it's such an important place, because it's preservation of places like this that will allow this niche to shine through and be part of the masses. Um, and then the third thing that I'd probably like to say is, within architecture, I was studying this concept called a panopticon, which is, I think, a prison in the Netherlands. And it's very interesting because the way it's built is it's a cylindrical shape, and you've got the warden smack in the middle. And what that does is the prisoners always know they're being watched. That allows for criminal activity to be completely ceased. The crime rates within the prison are less than 1%. And how leaping windows is a sort of contrast to that, but takes in some of the principles, is the fact that it's a very open space, and as Rohan sir said, an adda. It's an open adda, but you've got these two focal points, which is your top floor and the ground floor, and then you've got the basement, which is completely out of view. But the interaction within the top floor and the ground floor is so interesting. Is because you have someone sitting on the ground floor that will inherently make eye contact with someone on the top floor, and you will end up, showing a smile to the other person. And that's interesting because the way that it worked with me was I actually met someone that I didn't know at all. They looked at me, I looked at them, I went down, and I saw them with a comic book that I thought was interesting, and I was like, "Hey, you read Batman as well?" They're like, "Yeah, do you read Batman as well?" It's like very briefly, but that was an interaction that I didn't expect to have with anybody at all, right? So again, the Panopticon, very interesting space. Similarly, Leaping Windows also an interesting space, but the way it works is there's a two-way interaction as opposed to someone just watching multiple people in one book. So yeah, just spaces, and this particular space being so vivid in its both in its construction, in its visual aspect, but also the proposition that it brings in into creating a communal space is something that subconsciously really tapped into my brain, and I thought was super interesting. So yeah.
Thanks, Aryan. There is a question from Nidhi. Nidhi, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question?
Sure. Hello.
Hi.
It was a wonderful presentation. So I just have one question to both of you. Because we saw both these examples of, so Leaping Windows is, I think, in a sort of a privatized public space, but then the examples that Rohan shared with us were of, more of naturally occurring public spaces, which are built by the public themselves. Like it's not something that has been proposed by some business owner. So these addas or these gardens are so naturally occurring by themselves and by the people. Is there really a need to consciously plan and design these spaces, or like do architects really play an active role into making these public spaces a major part of our city? So this was just something that I was pondering upon, and I would like if you all could share something on this.
Sure,
Thank you.
Nidhi. Nidhi, thank you. Thank you so much for the question. That's one of those things, that architects, we are a very strange breed of people. The way that we are trained to think, we're always trained to think in precise edges, generally. We're trained to kind of think about order as beauty. We are trained to think of, there's a certain kind of legacy of architectural thinking in our education that pervades the way that we think about what is called good. And this is something, of course, that also, people in power, whether those are developers or whether those are governments, they also tend to prefer large spectacles of public performance over intimate spaces. And architects, are always slave to power, unfortunately. And that really determines very often the kinds of public spaces that they do make. I mean, just look at the waterfront in Ahmedabad, for example, the Sabarmati, which was a soft, variable sort of space that has been hardened and made extremely rigid and extremely hot, of course, so that it only serves as a public space maybe sometime in the morning and sometimes in the evening. And so we have this tendency to harden edges. And on the other hand, we also have this extraordinary tendency to romanticize fluidity. So we always love informality, and you'll find architects go completely gaga over the otlas in the old city or the chowks or the waterfronts. This is the other tendency, and we have not been able to reconcile these two kind of opposing tendencies. At one level, we love the older Indian cities and their extraordinary vitality, but when it comes to the acts of design that we make, we very often harden all those edges. So we obliterate everything that we so called appreciate. And really, that is one of the, I think, the like a kind of serious concern about architectural practice and the way that we imagine what is good, is for us to start evolving ways of intervening within cities that can enable sort of interactions rather than disable them. Since we constantly work within structures of power, we are usually implementing the power structure's desire to remove what it considers ugly the other. To be able to kind of resist that, we have to find new modes of practice that are not necessarily only working within structures of power, but are actually representing what can be called the greater common good. And the greater common good very often exists in these sorts of spaces, these moments of opportunities, these opportunities that are created within our cities for us to meet each other and for us to also get disturbed by each other, because to be part of the public realm is not a place where you're always supposed to be kind of comfortable. Being part of the public also has the frisson of danger of somebody that you don't know, to see something that you're unfamiliar with, because it's only through that kind of interaction do you grow. The sociologist Richard Sennett had a term for that. He called it the uses of disorder. He said that if a city is too ordered, and I'm paraphrasing, then the people in that city do not grow; they stay adolescent. He says that every city needs a little bit of disorder because it's only through friction with the other that one begins to grow. And somehow architects have to find that sort of middle ground, the ability to choreograph life rather than control it. And that is, I think, a challenge for us today. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think, Rohan, you very rightly said that by architects, I may put it in this manner that architects may design the stage, but they cannot themselves do the performance. We have to allow some space for people to come up in their own characters and, reclaim that space and try to modify also. Those rigid edges have to have some kind of flexibility which can be, reclaimed by people and modified. That is where, the design will, evolve and not be frozen in time. So there's a similar, question from Tanuja. Tanuja, would you like to share your thoughts with us? Hi, Tanuja, are you there? He writes, wonderful presentation. Isn't Leaping Window more of an example of a condensed, privatized public space? And Brindavan about creating private moments in public spaces.
So, um, like through limited experience, I don't know if I have the means to answer that question in the most apt way possible. But what I can say is, um, the barrier to entry into a place like Leaping Windows is little to none, right? Because no matter your background, you are welcomed into a space where there is equal learning, but also an equal opportunity to share stories. So, I mean, at the core of it, yes, it's private. But from an emotional standpoint, I don't think it's as private as people may deem it to be. Maybe because economical factors may add to it. But at the end of the day, I think learning is not limited to the economy. You can learn through any medium possible, and a place like Leaping Windows is, I would say, a good gateway into a learning opportunity, no matter your background or who you are, where you might come from. So,
I think
Rohan?
that's
Yeah.
the tragedy of this of our cities, is that we do not imagine the public as a living thing. So what we do is that we then kind of we just let it go. We create banal emptiness and say that is public. We don't think about scales. We don't think about intimacies. We don't think about interactions, and we don't think about stories. And we create these emptinesses that we say, अच्छा ये public space बन गया, एक banal कुछ playground डाल दिया, or you make what are called these in Bombay, at least you have these kind the parks, which have lots of these exotic plants. So you have an immediate suspicion only of people when you're imagining a space for people. So that is our tragedy actually, that we have no place where we have been able to create a public. And I mean, what Leaping Windows does is just logical. So it creates a public that it can make money off, like the malls do. In that sense, the same thing. What is nicer about Leaping Windows is that it has a sort of common interest that holds people who come there together. The world of comic books is an it's an interesting world to enter. And so you have common interests that are there. People are coming around and talking to each other about it. So that's nice.
Right.
But think about what would happen if public libraries were designed like that, where people could actually kind of come and hang out and do their own thing. We don't imagine public libraries like that, and we don't imagine public libraries at all. We don't imagine public life that goes beyond one room. So I think there is a thing to learn. Katie is giving me places to visit in Vrindavan. I will definitely look for it, Katie. Thanks for the advice, Mohini Uppan.
Yeah. So,
Where is it? I'll call him up and ask.
yeah, I'm sure you'll find many more places in Vrindavan which you might have visited.
I can tell you right away, Rohan.
Yeah.
Mohani Upavan is towards the south of Vrindavan, southwest of Vrindavan. And it's a little ashram type of place, which is a spin-off from the Nidhivan.
Oh.
But it's a live ashram, and it's a public ashram where people can visit, and they also serve free lunch there. But it's a very interesting, it exists in a very liminal kind of space between Sufism and the Bhakti movement.
Oh.
Yeah? And they also worship trees. In Nidhivan, you have trees which are sacred, but here there are trees which are worshipped. Yeah? They worship trees, this whole ashram. And of course, there are plenty of monkeys also. And the guru is called Mohini. Yeah, and they bury their dead in the courtyards. It's a
I'll try and find it. I'll definitely try.
And it is a public space. So
I'll look
actually, actually it represents those areas of Vrindavan, those aspects of Vrindavan, which is not very upfront and kind of ritually regularized spaces. It has unusual practices. It's quite a different place, but it's a public space, and it inhabits those areas of Vrindavan psyche, which is public at the same time not ritualized and upfront.
I should go there.
It's a very interesting space to visit.
Thank you. I'll definitely try and go there.
So, Rohan and Aryan, just coming back to our last previous conversation, when we're talking about these privatized public spaces. So, what do you think? I always feel that there is, while there are social systems deeply rooted in a public space, there are these inbuilt economic systems also. While we may feel that in traditional cities, everything is very spontaneous and very, unplanned, and there are these kind of economic aspects to these spaces. But there is these, not obvious, but inherent economic system, ecosystems, craftsmanship, or, different foods or rituals. All of these tie back into the economy of the city at large. So, responding to the previous question, how do you see these, privatized kind of public spaces? And recently, in the DDA master plan, they've also trying to give a boost to the POPs, the privately owned public spaces. How do you see these spaces coming up? Yeah, Rohan.
Me or Aryan?
Rohan first.
Yeah. I think that this complete kind of how should I put it, reversal of the government's role in securing the public realm for its citizens is something that I have not been particularly kind of pleased by, especially in Bombay, city I come from, where whether it's public housing, we don't do it, let the developer do it. Okay, whether that's a public garden, or we can't maintain it, let's get somebody to do it. And what happens is that somebody brings their own private interests into the maintenance of those areas. In Bombay, you have kind of these local residents who then claim those spaces and then refuse access to people, which I find to be just completely antithetical to the imagination of the public. So I'm always wary when a government kind of steps back from what it's supposed to be its role, which is the provision of public infrastructure, to say that we can't do it and we let private people do it, because the private people, they want to bring their interest. That is their role. It's not their role to protect public good. It's the government's role to protect public good. So I feel like that is one thing that I'm not that I think we should be fairly angry about, because we are losing out on the public realm of our city. However, I also think that there are some places where there is this idea of the commons, where there is a sort of blurring between the public and the private, the purely hard public and the private markets and common kind of spaces which generate a sort of economy, perhaps. There are many sorts of gradations, rather, is what I would like to kind of, since we are running out of time, very simply put, right? There are gradations of the private and public that also we need to be careful about, that we don't simply lump them up into two simple categories, but rather look at them as a sort of gradation from one to the other, and look at what kinds of spaces exist at these scales, and places that are intimate to places that are city-wide, scale-wise, places that have different tonalities, religious tonalities, narrative tonalities. We need to think about these as well when we're looking at the idea of the public within the city.
To sort of add to what Sir was saying, I was just thinking about the sort of varying levels of social hierarchies that exist in a city like Bombay, for example. And like what I find super interesting about community spaces in particular is the fact that they're designed for like all kinds of people. Because what ends up happening is when you have a very specific structure, a very specific space, there's expectations for how the social behavior is supposed to exist within those spaces. So if you go to like a geo garden, for example, you know there's a specific sort of there's an expectancy for your social behavior that sort of exists. But communal spaces, I feel, are a gateway to blurring sort of boundaries between the private and the public. And how in my head that works is they don't particularly have an impact on the power structures that exist, but more so the fact that their existence is purely on an acknowledgement basis. So they exist, and every single time you go to them, the expectancy of your social behavior dies down sort of right in the middle, and you become one with the surrounding. If that's a valid thing to say. So yeah, just an added thought that popped into my brain.
Just taking up there's another very interesting, we'll take this last question by Anshu. Anshu, would you like to ask a question and share your thoughts?
Great presentations. I really like the way Aryan explained and took us through his story of this place. And Rohan sir, the presentation that you had for Mathura was great, Vrindavan. So my question is basically like this space reminded me of this chapter that I read in Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard, which was Intimate Immensity. And so my question is based on like, do you think a similar privatized space or something, a cafe which is very specific, which has a specific function, would have a similar impact that it has in Mumbai if it were in another city or in another context or in another space where stories are very different. Mumbai as a place is as a city is very cosmopolitan. It has like people from all over the world. But if it's like a small place, like for example, Vrindavan or Mathura or maybe Jaipur or some other city where people are maybe not so much aware of comics as much as in Mumbai or Delhi, because there are these festivals like Comic Con and all of that. So, do you think something of similar space would work or have similar impact if it were in another context?
To be honest, I don't think even leaping windows would work in any other context except Versova. So forget whether it can work in Malad or Goregaon, where we live. Because Versova itself is a place which is full of storytellers. The film industry is like literally in that area.
Yeah.
There are all these people who are living together, these film editors and sound recordists and script writers. That's all what that seven bungalows, whatever that area is. It's just
Yeah,
full of
seven
that.
bungalows.
So, so I mean, I guess you're right. I think every context has different imaginations of what it means to be public, has different ways in which it comes together, has
Mhm.
different things that bind each other. And I think every kind of context will create its own kind of stories and find ways of telling each other those stories. Vrindavan has its ways, the Mohini Uppan, Nidhivan, or the Ghats. I guess it's I think a human need for us to find ways of telling each other stories and sharing those stories. So I'm sure it'll change if it goes to in any other context. But the human need to share those stories doesn't change. The modes of telling stories, perhaps, and the kinds of stories that are being told
Right,
will
right. Okay.
I think just to
change.
not out of it, living windows as a concept, right? As so said, there's inherent storytelling embedded within the concept of living windows. If you were to extrapolate that from Bombay to any other city, just as a concept, I think first of all it would morph or take shape of the communal aspect of that space. And having done that, it would create its own narrative. So maybe it's not through comic books this time. Maybe it's through the worshipping of
Mhm.
trees. But it would be its very own environment in a different context. So if you were to just take this as a just the core of this space as a medium or a concept, and you were to take it into a different place, I think it works. At least in my head. If you were to eliminate every other factor, just retain the storytelling aspect, I think it works.
Okay,
I think I,
great.
I
Yeah,
think
thank you.
the co-founders of Leaping Window Cafe, Utsa, Shom and Vidisha, have already taken that leap of faith and they have set up a new cafe in Bangalore, which is already open. So let's see, how it becomes contextualized in that particular city and what kind of an impact or response does it receive in another space other than Versova. I think that Bangalore will have its own, stories and narratives to tell. Thank you, Aryan, and thank you, Rohan, for a very interesting and conversation
Yeah.
around.
It's not.
Sorry. Yeah, it was a very interesting conversation around, these semi-public spaces, which are not actually the hardcore public spaces, but how these are very evocative, thematic crossover spaces, which evoke this, interaction and sociability. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I will now be sharing my screen to share the poster for the next session. The next play story session titled Panchganga Ghat Varanasi is scheduled for 14 November 2021 from 5 p.m. onwards. Our play storyteller for the session, Mr. Kaustubh Jaiswal, will be taking us out in the streets of Varanasi for an evening on the ghats on the banks of the Ganga. The place expert for the session, Professor Neeta Kumar, will unravel the mystical charm and cultural underpinnings of such reflective social spaces of interaction. So stay tuned for our upcoming play story. I would like to thank each one of you for your patronage to the Festival of Places. Do visit our website www.indiaheritagehub.org for more engaging content. You can also support and participate in multiple initiatives and programs of CATS by volunteering your skills and supporting us financially. You can write to us at info@catsindia.org for more details. Look forward to meeting all of you again next to next Sunday on 14 November, same time, same place for another exciting journey through the public spaces in our cities. Wishing you all a very happy and joyous Deepavali.
Thank you.